All right, welcome everyone. I call the April 16th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purpose of tonight's meeting is to conduct a study session on the Climate Action Plan update. Before we move on to agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our hybrid meeting format. City of Bothell is providing the option to attend this meeting either in person or remotely via Zoom. For those participating via Zoom, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. Please limit all comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the City of Bothell does not tolerate verbal harassment. Please remember this during your comments. Public comment will be allowed both in person and via Zoom. Those wishing to comment via Zoom were asked to submit an online form by 3 p.m. today, and I do not believe we received any. People wishing to submit written comments were also asked to submit those comments by 3 p.m., and we didn't get any of those either. Email was encouraged as well, but again, none received. Those in attendance may make their comments and have been asked to indicate their desire to comment on the sign-in sheets. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. And since there's no one in the audience, we won't be having any public comments either, I expect. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers during staff presentations, the staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone may follow along. At this point, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners. Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Here.
Commissioner Lever.
Here.
Commissioner Robson.
Here.
Commissioner Sills.
Here.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
In addition, staff in attendance include Community Development Director Gates, Cameron Colvin, Planner and Community Development, Emily Nielsen, Climate Action Civic Spark Fellow, and Steve Morikawa, Deputy Public Works Director. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. Please state your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. For commissioners, at the specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you wish to speak, please indicate that by raising your hand, and I'll call on you as I see. This will help avoid the problem of having 2 people speak at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. First item on the agenda is public comment, and as I indicated, we did not receive any comments in writing, and nor is there anyone in the audience, so we'll move past that item this evening. And I don't believe there are any Zoom commenters out there either, correct? No? So next item is approval of the March 19th minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Commissioner Lever.
Motion to approve.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Commissioner Jones, second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the meeting minutes, March 19th minutes. Any discussion around those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay, all were in favor, so the minutes are adopted. That brings us to our study session for the evening, the Climate Action Plan update. And Planner Colvin, you'll be leading us?
All right, I'll get the PowerPoint pulled up here. So as mentioned, I'm Cameron Colvin, Long Range Planner in the Community Development Department. Emily and I are here tonight to provide you all with an update on the Climate Action Plan. So no action is required tonight. What we'll be digging into a little bit is we'll be covering general project updates, what staff has been working on over the past couple of months, the results of our first community survey that we ran as part of this project. We'll be highlighting some upcoming engagement opportunities and then talking briefly about the status of the greenhouse gas inventory work. So it seems like time this year is already flying by, but we're already in April. So over the past couple of months, we've been working very closely with Cascadia Consulting and King County to conduct an updated community-wide greenhouse gas inventory, which measures greenhouse gas emissions citywide, and then also pulling together data for our first municipal inventory. So that's looking at how much emissions are associated with city operations. We also worked to run an initial community survey, which ran in January and February. We've also been meeting monthly with the Volunteer Advisory Committee for this project. In January, we met with them to provide an overview of the project and work with them on developing the survey questions and how we went about promotion for the survey. In February, we ran over the survey results with them and started discussing a couple of upcoming workshops that we're going to be hosting in May. And then at our last meeting in March, we started talking briefly about how we take the policies that came out of the comprehensive planning work and start building upon those for the climate action plan. Emily and I have also been tabling a couple of recent events. Just yesterday, we were at UW Bothell's Earth Fair, which had great turnout. They had a free item giveaway thrift store set up, and we got to talk with students about the climate action plan and ideas they had for inclusion in it. And then we also attended Innovation Lab High School's March for Climate at the end of March, which had a couple of tablers as well to talk with them. Okay, so digging in a little bit on the initial survey. So the main purpose of this survey was to get a better understanding of local priorities and concerns as it relates to climate change, as well as to start identifying potential barriers or opportunities around climate action. We hosted this survey through our Engage Bothell platform. And the survey ran for a little over a month from January 15th to February 23rd. This was a selective survey, so all survey respondents were voluntary. In order to help promote the survey, we posted it to the city website through social media accounts, our email listservs, through direct emails to local community groups and partners, and by word of mouth with help from our advisory committee members. And then we also printed physical flyers and business cards with QR codes and distributed those at highly trafficked and key locations throughout town. And so we also provided a 10 $25 gift cards as an incentive to encourage participation for randomly selected participants. So overall, we got a fairly good response rate. We ended up with 193 total responses. So based on Bothell's population size, that roughly gives us about a 95% confidence level with plus or minus 7% margin of error. So we pulled together a couple of tables here just to run through how representative the survey responses were compared to demographics citywide. So this first slide here covers kind of race, ethnicity, and languages spoken. If you look at the difference column, any of the ones that are plus are slightly oversampled, and any in the negative were likely undersampled. So the three that kind of stand out here, Asian or Asian American, Hispanic, and then households where English is not the primary language spoken. So those are opportunity areas where we could do some more direct outreach. The second slide here looks at renters as well as our older and younger populations here. So you'll see that most of our respondents were either homeowners rather than renters. They were undersampled. And then same thing with our older and younger demographics. They were slightly undersampled, and you'll notice in particular that under 18, we have a pretty large proportion of people under 18. We're not always going to be able to reach that full 24%, but try to get a bit closer. And we did reach out to a number of the high schools and their after-school programs and clubs to try to share the survey out. And then finally, looking at income distribution, most of the survey responses did tend to skew towards those of higher income and slightly underrepresented our lower income households. Any questions on those before we start running through the kind of responses and key takeaways? Yeah.
Thank you for doing these outreach programs. I noticed that you didn't include percentage of people who identified as disabled, and the method of outreach here, I feel like we've gotten a pretty solid consensus that strictly online and limited or discrete. What's the word I'm looking for? In-person events really won't be enough to reach those. And what we're seeing is people who have English as their second language, people who are disabled, and people who are elderly. And I feel like that's really something we've been talking about a lot here at the Planning Commission. Could you just maybe explain a little bit about like how our DEI outreach? I'm forgetting her name. I know that she's somebody. Thank you. And how she's collecting her input, and what other methods specifically we are taking to reach those populations.
So we reached out to Gabby. A lot of the survey promotion was done through us, and then kind of working with other staff and partners to distribute it out. During this particular time period, there wasn't a lot of on-the-ground events happening or opportunities that we could identify where we could do more in-person engagement. So where we tried to fill that gap was with driving around, distributing flyers to community centers, religious institutions, bus stops, mobile home parks, things like that, to try to bridge that gap. But just this time of year was a little difficult to,
Thank you for that. I'm so glad to hear that you were reaching out to religious groups, because I think that that's really important. Those are certainly major hubs for all of those populations we're trying to reach. But again, handing out a flyer has that hurdle for people who don't speak English, have trouble accessing the internet, and are disabled. So I wasn't even aware of whether or not we could reach out to houses of worship. That's an excellent way to reach out. I know that there are several places that host dinners, for example, free dinners, which is a wonderful way to reach the disabled, the homeless, young people. And again, I do think we're going to need to show up in these places and have those discussions. Because houses of worship, I think, is a great idea. Also, the YMCA, certainly the hospitals just around the area. There are certainly, like, the NAMI group meets here. And so while I understand there may not have been public outdoor events, there are certainly places that we could reach out to. And I'm really hoping to see a push for that because this is not something they should be excluded from. I would, in fact, put this, like, priority getting outreach to those people, because not only are their concerns our concerns, but they have major hurdles to overcome when it comes to climate change. So please, please, please invest some of those resources in going directly to the source to get opinions on how these people are affected. We need those voices. We know how the upper echelon homeowner, primarily English-speaking people are affected. We know that already. We need people who aren't here to be represented.
Could you roll back to the demographic slide? Yeah. Yeah, that one. I'm looking at, so we're pretty close on Chinese, Cantonese, Mandarin speaking, under 2% on Spanish speaking, but then English not primary language, 22% under. Do you know what other languages there are? Because I would think it's not either the Spanish or the Chinese.
Yeah, our DEI coordinator has a list of 8 or 10 languages or so that are primarily speaking, but they would be able to speak probably better about what those are. Yeah.
Okay. Because it would seem that those communities would have associations, whether it be churches or other places where they gather, that you could get. So now we know they haven't been reached. How do we get to them? That's the question. Other? Commissioner Liver?
Thank you. So thank you so much for all the information. And I just want to second what I just heard from Commissioner Robinson. And I also want to kind of really offer my input around the targeted component. When I look at these numbers, these are populations that we know that are hard to reach. And I know in the input that I have provided is really making sure that we're segmenting and understanding that additional level of outreach and engagement that needs to happen, knowing that it is going to be more expensive. So I also know that it is about like moving forward and knowing how we're going to be sort of like correcting or closing the gap. And if you hopefully you're going to address this later, but if you are not addressing this later, I'm really interested in understanding how we're going to be closing the gap of the populations that we did not hear, knowing that there's concentration on where these populations are. And then when it comes to the outreach that did happen, I really think that there's a lot of value of understanding the lessons learned. So if there was that particular outreach with particular partners, what happened then? Like, and then what happens at a micro level with the city of Bothell that I feel like is, still kind of smaller on the smaller side. I really want to know how we can, through this process, bring them along or really hyper-focus our efforts on getting the input that we know is hard to get.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Sills.
Yeah, Commissioner Sills, I guess I would be curious if when you take out, I guess in this case, if you added up all those demographics you have listed here, do the results on some of those core questions change dramatically? And I know that might not be statistically significant, but just curious if we're seeing the income levels as well. Like certainly I think there would be a lot of fluctuation on questions like EVs, but I don't know that for sure. But I'd just be curious with some of those questions if their opinions change dramatically or not.
Yeah, that's probably a good segue. We're going to run through kind of more details of the individual responses, so maybe we'll get to that question. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Emily to talk about kind of responses and key takeaways.
Alrighty, yeah, so diving into the responses, 95% of respondents agree that it is important that the city take proactive measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we invited people to explain a little bit more to their answers to the question, should Bothell's greenhouse gas emission reduction goals be less ambitious, on par with, or more ambitious than state goals? And across the board, we heard that measurable, cost-effective, and impactful actions are most valued. The community most supports climate actions that improve quality of life and help reach other community priorities such as improving ecosystem and public health, affordability, and connected communities with reduced traffic. There was also an emphasis on holding other entities accountable. So while people recognize that individual and citywide actions are important, respondents also emphasize that the city should do what it can to hold other polluting entities accountable and advocate for change at a regional, state, federal, or even global level. Many respondents emphasized that the city should act with urgency and prioritize taking quick yet intentional actions to do our part to reduce emissions and create a more livable Bothell for the good of current and future generations. Go to the next slide. So we asked the community what kind of energy efficiency measures that they've already taken, as well as what they would be interested in adopting. And residents responded that they're most interested in home solar, weatherization, and energy efficient and electric appliances like heat pumps. The main barriers that respondents face to making these changes include cost, lack of information, and limited ability to make property changes, such as the case for renters and young people. People were interested in financial incentives, resource lists, and case studies of other Bothell residents who have made changes. Go to the next slide. For transportation, less people are getting around via micromobility devices such as bikes, scooters, etc., and carpools. Most drive alone, and many have used public transit in the past year, but they might not do so frequently. The main factors people listed for being discouraged from using alternative transportation include the time that it takes, limited transportation service, and limited space or ability to transport items or passengers. Next slide. In terms of electric vehicles, we saw that 31% of non-EV users are considering using an EV in the next 1 to 3 years, and an additional 24% are unsure. The main barriers to EVs listed, again, are cost, limited access to reliable charging, concern about driving range, and time required to charge. One finding of note is that most potential future EV users said that they would prefer to charge their EVs at home, but many lack access, especially those that don't live in single-family homes. And I didn't initially include this, but I did do a little calculation. Engage Bothell has a feature where you can kind of play with the visualization of data to compare demographics with who responded to the question. So I looked more into the question to non-EV users asking, do you currently have the ability to charge an EV at home? And of course, this is a small sample size, but single-family folks who live in single families said 40% they do not have ability to charge. 43% of people who live in duplexes or townhomes do not. 75% of people who live in multifamily areas indicated that they did not. And 83% of mobile home respondents said that they do not have a place to charge the EV at home. We'll move on to zero waste. So there was a high self-reported adoption of zero waste practices, including recycling, composting, buying secondhand, etc. People were most supportive of the creation or expansion of community sharing, repair, or reuse programs, and incentives that make the lower waste option the most convenient and affordable. People were also invited to choose other, and some people wrote in echoing the desire for extending producer responsibility and advocating for zero waste policies to stop waste at the source instead of passing it along to consumer responsibility. Move on. Our last section gauged community interest in different climate topics and engagement methods. There was a high interest in volunteering, a micro-grant program that could support small-scale community-led climate action projects, and workshops where people could learn more. Some additional ideas included a student-led climate innovation competition, doing green business spotlights, and a neighborhood climate champion program. And we'll go to the next slide. For the workshops, people were most interested in learning about solar energy for the home, then zero waste, home electrification, neighborhood climate action training, and transportation topics. And we'll go to the next slide to close it out. So these results will help us develop our strategies and actions for the Climate Action Plan, inform the development of a prioritization framework to help us decide which strategies and actions to focus more on. They'll guide education priorities, and they already have. So for instance, we heard that lots of people don't know where to go for information about resources. So we built the climate action page that's now live on the City of Bothell website, and that centralizes resources from City Council and external sources that individuals can use to reduce their impact on different climate sectors like buildings, transportation, and zero waste. So if you search climate action, it should show up. Otherwise, it's one of the subpages of the sustainability site. And these results have also helped us guide engagement priorities. For instance, we heard that people are interested in workshops, and we heard what kind. So I'll pass it over to Cameron to talk more about how we are realizing those. And if you have any questions, we can answer them now as well.
Yeah, do we want to pause there if there's any questions on the specific responses?
Commissioner Jones?
So my questions, I have two questions. The first is, you mentioned that you also went to a couple of tabling events recently. Is that feedback incorporated into the survey results? And I asked that question because I really appreciate the comments that came up in the last section, because I would imagine if we wanted to get the feedback from some of the populations that were missed, we're going to have to do more, whether in-person surveys or those types of things. Are you planning to do that, and are you planning to incorporate that into these results? So that's the first question.
Yeah, so the two events that we did most recently were after the survey ran. So a lot of what we focused on for those events were soliciting ideas and input on strategies or actions that they specifically would like to see incorporated in the plan. But yeah, there may be, if in the future, there's an opportunity to align, survey that's going on during the same period where we can do more tabling events. I think that's a great way to, fill gaps, like you said.
Yeah, and even if it's not run concurrently, we do capture all of the feedback that we get at in-person events. For instance, the board at UW Bothell took a picture of it. It'll go in our engagement summary. It will be counted. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I know it's expensive to do in-person surveys and it takes longer and those types of things, but I do want to echo what was said before, that it would be nice if you could incorporate some of those activities to supplement these. And it sounds as if you can't for this round. It sounds maybe like in the future that's what you're planning to do. So my second question is, and it's because I'm never going to give this up. I understand, based on the last time we talked about this, that the focus was intentionally on mitigating greenhouse gases as opposed to adaptation. What are the plans to go back and survey to find out about what people are doing to adapt, what they'd like to be doing to adapt, et cetera? Because I do think there's synergies here, and there's some conflicts as well. And curious, because you just did spend all this time on the survey, are you going to spend a lot of time on another survey at some point? What's the plan?
Yeah, so the overall plan on that is kind of this first go round. We're trying to meet our grant deliverable requirements. So that's why we're kind of trying to target it. We're on a short timeline to focus on mitigation first. Over the next year, we're going to be working with the county and other regional partners to update our hazard mitigation plan. So we'll be kind of pulling pieces of that in the future to build out the climate action plan to incorporate resilience planning in our next go round. And so as part of that, we could look at doing more detailed surveys to glean that information.
Commissioner Sills?
Yeah, I was just kind of really impressed with the community that above 90% are concerned. So it was very important, right? And then I think on top of that, saying that a lot felt that the state law, the Climate Commitment Act, was what they thought should be the baseline. I think it's an opportunity for Bothell to really become a role model municipality and how we take that on and take advantage of that. So I thought that was really great and good to see, and just overall seeing how people are doing their own things, but are also, engaged and care. So I thought it was really great to see that. And I think it'll be great to inform as you go along with this first ever action plan.
Commissioner Liver.
Thank you. I mean, I echo everything, so I am very pleased to see all the work behind it, but I am really concerned with the lack of representation, particularly knowing that when it comes with the climate change, who is going to be impacted. And I am also well aware of the needs to focus on the timelines, but I feel it's disingenuous to think that we can develop something without really the voices that need to be at the table. So when I see the development or the workshops, I really wonder if it would be feasible to have some priority focus groups where it might not be necessarily like a super heavy survey, but where we can really just get some of those themes that we already know, because when it comes to the issues or the barriers that we have to really make us more climate resilient, we know what those are. It's just a matter of really understanding what do they look like for our city. And I really understand there are competing priorities, but right now with everything that's happening at a national level, and the need to adapt to what's happening so that we can really have a plan that can be implemented at a local level, can only happen if it is designed by those who we need at the table. So I don't know how to express my concern. I'm really, really concerned with the voices that are not reflected in what's going to be driving the design of the plan.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. I want to echo what Commissioner Leroy was saying, that I noticed that people said, how many of us take public transportation? And immediately I thought, well, those aren't disabled people. That all 90% of them drive. Well, yes, of course they drive, because the people who can't drive aren't coming out to these meetings. The people, and so immediately I was like, I think maybe our results are immediately skewed. And so I just wanted to echo again, in electronic vehicles, I was like, well, I mean, if you can drive, that's great. If you are homeless, you're not overly concerned about solar panels. Maybe on your backpack, fair enough. I mean, seriously, but again, maybe those people who will be most effective, their top concerns are not being even discussed. They're not being put into the discussion. And so and particularly the availability of these workshops and the things that now we will be focusing the education component on, which I'm super excited about. I want solar panels, I want all the workshops, but I want to be able to reach people who will be most affected. So just seconding what
Commissioner Jones.
So I really appreciate this discussion, and I guess, and maybe it's coming up in some of your other slides, but it would have been nice even for those who did reply to the survey but were in, right now what you showed us was the aggregated information, but what did the renters say compared to those who live in homes, even if it was a pretty small population? What did those lower than a certain income level say versus the ones that were higher income? It would be nice to see some of that, because that would help us see if maybe, maybe if they're all the same, then it's fine. Maybe, but of course it depends on the size, the N, right? How many you actually have in each group.
Commissioner Sills.
I just want to point out one thing, that we don't actually know that people with disabilities did not fill out the survey.
Of course.
So just pointing that out. That
I think we do. We have that information. Yeah.
It's just
and
not on the presentation.
yeah, sorry. We can pull that information and share that with you all.
Was it 2%?
It was, so this is, for the demographics, people self-elected to respond to the questions. They were all optional. So 165 out of 193 responded, and 11.4% said yes, and about 10 said I prefer not to answer. So, and it was just really hard to find data, given the expansive nature of disabilities, to compare that to, solid data at that census tract level. Yeah.
Other commissioner comments? Okay.
Okay, so next we'll talk about a couple of the upcoming engagement opportunities. So as you all are aware, Earth Day is coming up. And so as part of that, the city and several of our partners have several events planned. We are also looking to host 2 kind of climate action plan focused workshops in early May, one on Saturday, May 3rd, and one on Saturday, May 10th, both here in council chambers. The first workshop is going to focus on energy efficiency and electrification. So we're going to have guests from PSE and SNOPUD there to talk about various rebate and incentive programs that they have available to support energy upgrades, appliance upgrades, and things like that. And then the second workshop is going to be focused on alternative transportation. So we'll have guests there from Community and Sound Transit, King County Metro, and Cascadia Bike Club to talk about their programs as well for that. So there were a couple of different goals that are, yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Lever.
Thank you. Can you go back to the 2 events for these workshops? Is it feasible to add another workshop that could really focus on the mitigation and the impact that climate has on historically marginalized populations that could potentially capture the groups that we're discussing, or how were these topics kind of selected, or?
Yeah, so part of it was like survey responses, but the major thing was our 2 biggest sectors. The 2 biggest sectors for greenhouse gas emissions are buildings and energy and transportation. So that's where we tried to focus. Usually that makes up about 97% of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where we wanted to kind of focus efforts that are going to have the largest impact on greenhouse gas reduction. So that's kind of why those 2 particular topics were chosen. They are taking a significant level of effort to plan and organize, and we're coming up on 2 to 3 weeks out on these. So we could potentially look at doing them later in the process, but where we're at right now, it would be difficult to add an additional workshop.
There are resilience measures that overlap with some of these GHG reduction measures. So for instance, heat pumps can provide both heating and cooling to homes. And as it gets hotter and hotter, the people who are most vulnerable to heat pumps can provide a very necessary cooling factor. And so we potentially could we're thinking of, well, we'll get into this, but we're going to be doing tables. So one of the tables potentially could have a tilt towards highlighting those strategies and actions that have some sort of overlap with resilience.
And that is great. And I just want to offer from sort of like a cultural perspective. And again, this just speaks to my experience when it comes to all these themes and topics, even when it comes to multi-generations, there's this concept that it is not for me. And I'm going to just use my family, like my grandma, rest in peace now. She would be like, oh, these are a bunch of rich people. They're just taking your, it's just like, it's not true. That's just not true, and don't even waste your money. There's all this like knowledge gap that we have that, yes, we're not going to resolve it, but I think kind of like continuing to plan as if it doesn't exist does concern me, because it's like we know better, we know where the need is, and then pushing through something that is really not representing the need of the communities. Like even when I completed the survey, some things I was like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what, because it's completely outside my area of expertise, and I'm not my mom or my grandma's generation, but they're quite behind. So I am, again, like really concerned with the approach and the lack of voices that we might be missing as we continue to design, but not for the folks who are going to be impacted by climate change.
Okay, so there were a couple of different goals for the workshops that we worked with our advisory committee to develop. One, they identified a need to inform, so we want to provide context to what the need for the climate action plan, what we're covering, and then information about those specific topic areas. We wanted to be able to share resources about available programs that people may not be aware of. We want to, solicit input on the actions and priorities that get incorporated in the plan. And then also provide an opportunity to network, meet representatives from, community partners like PSE, SNOPUD, and our transit providers to make those connections, as well as with other members of our community. So just kind of a tentative outline of what we're thinking for the workshops. We're wanting to kick things off with a presentation from city staff. Like I said, to provide an overview of what is a climate action plan, what we're looking at as part of this project, what typically are the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions, and provide some context there. We'll then have some time from our partners to give brief presentations on available programs that they run. And then we'll have a rotating kind of small group discussion where people will have more time to provide more detailed input on what gets kind of included in the strategies and actions of the plan. Any other questions on the workshops before talking about other upcoming events?
Commissioner Robson?
Thank you. Where are these going to be held? Here.
Here in council chambers.
And that's phenomenal. Let's, though, maybe from now on, because I know these things take forever to organize, consider maybe if it's possible to hold them in community centers, in at the North Shore Senior Center, or places where, or churches, if that's possible. I know the political stuff can get sketchy, but political versus religion, but or even schools where people are already in community, and so they can kind of go together, and their community leaders can encourage them to do that. Places of access like churches and schools are very diverse and already established communities. So keep that in mind. Thank you. This is great.
Commissioner Oliver?
I think I agree, and I think this is a wonderful opportunity for that targeted outreach. So knowing the populations that we're missing, I don't know how feasible it is to really have that targeted engagement component and really hyper-focus your efforts on making sure that the voices that are missing can join these sessions. And then for the rotating components, if they can be that kind of like cultural lens, knowing that not everyone is at the same level, and then making sure that that can be taken under consideration. Thank you.
Commissioner Robson?
I'm just going to throw this out there. It just occurred to me. Transit centers might be another place to table. Those people do use public transportation, so it might be a great place to get, hey, how can we help you guys? Just a table there, and to ask people to meet you, right? Hey, we're hosting this workshop here on nice days. Might be a possibility.
Okay, so I wanted to take a moment to also highlight some of the other various Earth Day events that are coming up. So our stormwater group just kicked off an Adopt a Drain contest. We have a couple of different workshops coming up. They're going to be doing a container gardening workshop. UW Bothell is going to be hosting a repair cafe on April 24th. And then up at the Recology store at Canyon Park, they're going to be doing a mending workshop. A little later in the month, we're going to be running a city nature challenge through our stormwater program. There's going to be a planting event over at the former Wayne Golf Course on Earth Day itself. as well as a native plants workshop over at the library. And then one of the cool things that's new, we reached out to Kim Moore, who's currently running a Solarize campaign, and to see if Bothell residents could participate in that as well. And they can, and they can get potentially reduced rates on solar installations. So if that's of interest, they're going to be holding a second Go Solar workshop on May 21st. And yeah, if you want to learn more details about any of these events, time, dates, signups, they're all on our Earth Day webpage on the City of Bothell website.
That was wonderful. And I did adopt the train, okay? Just so you know, like I am following and I'm trying to do my little best. So it is a really great place of resources. So
That's great to hear. Okay, so by this meeting, we were hoping to have the initial results back from our community-wide greenhouse gas inventory. We did not end up receiving those, so we'll keep the discussion fairly brief tonight, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of a glimpse of what has been going on behind the scenes over the past couple of months. So as I mentioned, we've been working with Cascadia Consulting and King County K4C to conduct our first municipal inventory, which measures, how much emissions are associated with city operations. So some of the data that we pulled together was looking at energy use across our various facilities, transportation, so looking at, fuel consumption from fleet vehicles and equipment, employee commutes and business travel, energy use associated with our utilities, water and sewer facilities, as well as solid waste generation at our various sites, and then also refrigerants. And so it was a bit of a cross-departmental effort to pull all this data together to hand over to Cascadia to run this. So as I mentioned, we'll also be getting our community-wide greenhouse gas inventory results, which will cover the years 2022 and 2023. This will help inform our local targets and how we contribute to the state targets, which is to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So through a lot of the recent state legislation, that's going to hopefully contribute significantly and get us a large portion of the way there, but there is going to be a need for local action across jurisdictions to help get us to these fairly ambitious goals. The other things that we'll be utilizing this data for is helping track progress over time. So I've provided an example on the right just from Shoreline, looking at their 2009 and 2019 inventories. We do have a previous inventory data from 2019 that we had from our participation in K4C, and the most recent update is going to cover the years 2022 and 2023. So we'll be able to look at the past 5-year timeline to kind of see what has changed. Obviously, COVID and the pandemic had a large impact, particularly on the transportation sector and commutes. So we'll have to kind of factor that in and qualify that data to some extent. And then, as mentioned, this is Bothell's first municipal inventory, so unfortunately we won't have anything to compare to, but we can utilize this year as a baseline as we move forward. We just completed the fleet electrification plan, which is going to be transitioning our entire fleet over the next 18 years, so that's going to make a good dent in the transportation portion, and the various other citywide initiatives going on. And that's all I've got for now. Questions?
Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, this is great. It's just great to see the city of Bothell doing all of this. when you think about this in terms of the plan, and this is where I'd like you to help me understand, as part of the plan, the climate action plan, will you set specific targets and goals and tactics to get to those goals for both municipal and for the overall city? And then will you track it via dashboards or something like that, similar to what you showed up there for Shoreline? Because that is fantastic.
I think that's the plan. And obviously, we'll have to have a bit more conversation on that once we get the greenhouse gas inventory results. But what we've typically seen with other jurisdictions are, either tying to, the statewide goals and just looking at that in a local context of, which areas they need to reduce. Some jurisdictions have also gone above and beyond. So that's also an option, but that'll be, yes, I think that's the direction that we're kind of headed. Yep.
And when do you think, will that come back? Will your preliminary draft of the plan with targets and things like that, will that come here? How is that all going to work in terms of our input and feedback and things like that?
Yeah, so we do have a couple of dates flagged. I think one meeting in May, we were going to potentially come back and specifically focus on strategies and actions. And by then we will have the greenhouse gas inventory results. So maybe we can run through those and talk a little bit more about this, looking at targets and starting that conversation. And then we also have a meeting in June flagged to go over the draft plan and get y'all's kind of feedback and recommendations before we hit our summer recess. Yeah.
That's perfect. So I promise this is the last comment. That sounds terrific in terms, so we'll see it at least one more time or two more times. It would be awesome in May when we see the greenhouse gas inventory, if we could see some of that differentiation that I mentioned before in terms of the survey results, because you're not going to, clearly you're not going to be able to fill any gaps, and it's always hard to do this kind of stuff. But it would help me in terms of the feedback I provide you for targets, et cetera, and strategies, if I had a sense of if the aggregate data represented everyone, all the different subgroups, or if maybe there were some site differences, recognizing, again, that your sample populations might be really small for some groups. I think that would help some of this conversation that we're having.
Other commissioner comments? Commissioner Lever.
Can you remind me how the implementation of the plan is funded? And then how is this potentially going to impact it with what we're seeing happening at a national level?
Yeah, so this project, as well as the Urban Forest Management Plan, are being funded through Climate Commitment Act funds that are state appropriated. And so they, in talking with our grant administrator, they are secure through the end of this grant cycle, as well as the 2025-2027 cycle, which I think we're gonna work with them to. Any remaining funds after June, we're going to carry over through the end of the year. But yeah, as far as we've heard, funding secure.
Now, was the funding just for the development or for the implementation of it? If I recall correctly, it was for the development of the plan?
Development,
because the
yes.
cost of implementing is, we're talking about two different buckets of funding, right? So what about the implementation bucket?
Yeah, so yeah, that'll have to be part of the upcoming budget cycle discussions. And one of the things we hope to get out of this plan is a good understanding of where we have capacity, where we don't, and how we kind of build that out or create additional funding to support implementation over the next several years.
And thank you. That is helpful because as I am thinking about the adapting to scenarios that may not be so optimistic, perhaps, like when it comes to developing and gathering the impact, like how do we gather feedback or design solutions that can be realistic about a potential lack of funding that will help us really move the needle at a micro level, knowing that in the next, I mean, things are just changing so rapidly. So I think it would be wonderful to kind of really start thinking of the funding as well. And then that will help almost kind of create the scope, because there's nothing more frustrating to that gather input and feedback. And then you have this grandiose plan, and then it's just unfortunately not implementable. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think as we flesh out kind of an implementation plan, we'll definitely be looking at, rough, estimates of costs, just on a quick glance, particularly, if there's particular strategies that are going to have a large reduction in greenhouse gases and are low costs, then that's great. Those are probably ones that we'll be able to implement sooner with less capacity. Yeah.
No, I promise it was the last comment, but that was that. I really appreciated when we had conversations and presentations about the various transportation elements and the planning for that, because they talked about this diverse source of funding. So some of it would come from impact fees, some of it comes from taxes, some of it comes from grants, those types of things. I think that really helps us as we think about a multi-year plan to understand, some of those possible sources and which ones should fall in which buckets. Helps with prioritization, I think.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges with this topic is there's so many overlaps with various departments across the city. So yeah, it is going to be multiple pots that get us to the finish line.
Other comments? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation, very informative. As you can hear from the questions, we're engaged and interested, so we look forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is reports from members. Do we have anything for the group? Looking around the table. Commissioner
Well,
Lever?
I just want to say again, there's a lot of wonderful information on the website, particularly for the different events for Earth Day and everything related to climate. So thank you, and I'm excited about being more engaged and involved in that. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is King County just opened a new application for the Immigrant and Refugee Commission. So if you could please, everyone in your networks, just share that out, as it's going to be informing policy for the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? All right, reports from staff. Do you have anything for the group?
Just a couple things. One, wanted to recognize that Commissioner Westerbeck has been reappointed to continue serving on the Planning Commission. Thank you for volunteering.
Happy to be back.
Also want to note that on March 27th, the PSRC Executive Board acted to certify the 2024 comp plan update. So you all know this was a huge endeavor and a huge effort, and we couldn't have done it without your input, your involvement, your dedication. So thank you for that. We're glad to see that in the past.
But applause to staff for your massive work on that.
And many that aren't even in this room. A couple of council updates. On April 1st, the council did pass a resolution regarding the singular 2025 docket request, that private amendment request. So they directed staff to decline further consideration at your recommendation and include the topic within the Canyon Park sub-area update, and asked us to move it up a little bit. So we'll begin work on that, exploring the Canyon Park update in Q4 of 2026. So bump that up a little bit in the 5-year plan. Also last night, sign code legal update public hearing was held. So that's moving along, and we'll have an ordinance before council at their May 6th meeting. And then last thing from staff, our next scheduled meeting is May 7th. We've got 3 topics that night, 3 pretty hefty ones. So urban forestry management plan, Cameron will be back, Emily will be back to go through that, to talk about the canopy and inventory results. So a lot of good data to go through. We'll work to get the packets out with lots of imagery for you there. The Phase 2 code amendment updates, so those will be coming back for some final tinkering with draft code on things like lot coverage, FAR, and parking, as well as the neighborhood scale commercial, and then a couple of administrative items, and then some housing items that we'll be looking at, middle housing code updates to align with the resolution that council passed last March for achieving Tier 1 city, what that code would look like, as well as some affordable housing incentives. So a pretty packed agenda for May 7th. So it should be a good time.
All right, thank you. Well, there being no further business, then is there a motion to adjourn? Everyone wants to stay?
Motion to adjourn.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Sarah Gustafson here. I'll second. Thank you.
All right, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. It has been voted. All approve. The meeting is adjourned at 7 o'clock p.m. The next meeting will be May 7th. Thank you all.
Yeah.